We're doing it now more than we ever have.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. So I come from probably one of the forgotten demographics, and that is the professional, educated, multiple degree individual who cannot find work because I've been deemed overqualified. I've experienced a year of homelessness in San Francisco before arriving here in LA. I'm on the verge again because I simply can't find a job. Now, does LAPSA have any way of helping me stay where I am? I am housed, I love where I live. I have a roommate who is an angel who hasn't kicked me out even though I haven't paid rent for 3 months to cover that back rent. And I spoke with, I live in Santa Monica, I spoke with Human Resources or
Yeah.
and they said they can't do anything because I'm subletting, I'm not on the lease. So what do I do? How do I keep my home?
So I think there are some programs that LASA have that might be able to help. Some of those things include shallow subsidies that we're able to provide for folks. This might not hit your situation exactly, but if you can't make up all of your rent, we can help with a portion of it for a certain amount of time. We also do things like if you are staying with a friend or a family member or whoever, there are stipends we can give to help support with electric bills and food and things like that to keep you diverted out of the system in the first place. So I think the answer is yes. I'll give you my contact and we'll see if we can get you connected. But thinking creatively like that, I'll tell you, it didn't happen 5 years ago or 10 years ago. This is a new thing that we're ramping up and we're seeing more and more. But I think it's how we are going to end up stemming that inflow so we don't have 100,000 people falling in the first place. Yeah.
How do you help the homeless problem at the same time keeping in mind the people who are landlords and creating responsible bills where we are already a state that's kind of difficult to evict people who sometimes, there's got to be a balance. And we're already one of the states that's the most difficult. And how do you keep that balance?
Between evictions and...
You create these bills where it's difficult to evict someone who sometimes...
Squatting.
I'm sorry?
Squatting or adverse possession.
What he's saying is it's difficult as a landlord to get somebody out.
Who's squatting in your
Squatting,
apartment?
and that maybe helps the homeless, but it hurts the housing stock.
Yes.
Yeah, it goes both ways, absolutely. I think some of it is, and there has been some legislation passed at the state level to increase our renter protection and our tenant protection because we are seeing more and more some of those wrongful evictions, but there's other programs you might want to talk about what we're doing around the right to council work in the city that I think could help advocate on both sides also.
Yeah, so there's been a push, I mentioned earlier, the right to counsel, which, I'll try that again. So as Heidi mentioned, there's been a push for a right to counsel, which is to help people who've been facing eviction get some legal representation, which landlords actually, who am I talking to? I couldn't see. Okay, which actually a lot of landlords are not happy about. I'll admit that. But what we find, I mean, if you're the good landlord, you're evicting somebody for the right reasons. We've got a lot of scurrilous landlords in Los Angeles who are evicting people for the wrong reasons, and they just don't know the legal system enough. So trying to keep them in place is something we're trying to do. But the other thing we're doing is we're trying to do eviction prevention in a way that is actually beneficial to landlords. We're getting a bunch of money from the state this year, and we're squabbling right now or discussing how to spend it. And one of the things that I'm an advocate for is eviction prevention, which is giving people who are in a situation like we just heard in Santa Monica a stipend or a short-term subsidy to be able to pay you the rent so you're not out the rent and stuck in a situation where you've got to hire a lawyer and go through the unlawful detainer process and stuff like that. So sort of a win-win.
Well, have you thought of contacting the landlords, like this gentleman in the back, so the landlords themselves can come?
Yes, we've been in touch both with AGLA and the California Apartment Owners Association. Well, while I'm up here, I want to say a word about Patty before I turn it back over to her. People often have a skeptical view of people who work for government agencies as bureaucrats who sit on their hands. I want to let you know that Heidi is a remarkably effective, creative, aggressive public servant. When she worked at the VA, and I had an opportunity to work for her, she and the woman that she worked for, Megan Flans, were people who struggled and fought every day to get to yes. The VA is a mess, and there's a huge vacuum of leadership. And usually in those situations, that's when people who work for government will sit on their hands and do the safe thing, which is to not take any risks. She and Megan every day took risks. And if it weren't for her and Megan, we would not have safe parking there right now for veterans. We would not be building the bridge housing the city and county is doing, because she said, yeah, go ahead. And we wouldn't be funding the homeless housing that we're building by rehabbing the buildings there if she and Megan hadn't said, yeah, go ahead. Because usually folks would have said, oh, we might get in trouble, so no. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I misunderstood that question, but what the resources available for squatters, for people who are attempting adverse possession or trying to manipulate a system?
I think that goes back to working with the landlords individually, and that comes more from the housing authority side than it does from the LAHSA side. So I can't speak quite as much to that piece, but our housing authorities do address those issues. Yeah.
I see that homelessness is down in the Palisades while it's up everywhere else. And I think
What'd you guys do? What's the
I think it's been through the amazing work of this task force.
Yep.
And I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on the methods of the task force and lessons learned from what they've done. Is it something that you're encouraging other communities to do? And I'd love to hear the councilman address it also, please.
Yeah. I mean, I think everything that the task force is doing are the right things. I was thinking about this earlier and talking to my team. It's homelessness, and the way to solve homelessness, as the councilman was saying, is not, there's no silver bullet. It's a slow process. It didn't become like this overnight. It's not going to go away overnight, but we know what works. We know that permanent housing works, whether it's permanent supportive housing, whether it's rapid rehousing or something else. We know permanent housing works, and we know all the components that are needed to help us get there, whether it's outreach and building trust, whether it's interim housing through a bridge home so you have a place to stay until you get a unit. We know all of those things, right? So it's like baking a cake, right? And you look at the recipe, and the recipe says you need flour, and if you're out of flour, you go get more flour. You don't blame the recipe for calling for flour, right? And I think the task force is the perfect example of this idea that we know what the recipe is, we know the components that work, it's slow, it's hard, but it's the right thing to do. And I think if there were more communities that could use this and take your leadership and step into it, we would be in a lot different place in Los Angeles County.
Thank you for acknowledging the work the task force has done, because what the task force has done is really a model in a number of different ways. One, the task force did what we're hoping we could, that LAHSA, through the work of the city and the funding of the city and the county, can do more of, which is focus. Right now, as I mentioned earlier, the contract that we have hired LAHSA for has them going out and following sanitation trucks and being there when it is least effective and doing it on a reactive basis. What we need to be doing is what this task force did, which is focus on a specific set of people, know them by name, work with them on a daily basis until you get them to yes. The other thing that the task force did is it was not playing king of the mountain. It did not believe that there was one solution that everybody had to take. There were people that were reunited with their families. There were people who got into long-term housing. There were people who may have gotten a rental subsidy. This task force was open to anything that worked, which we're both trying to move government more into that approach. The third thing they did is they made a really smart choice when they worked with OPCC, which is now the People Concern, because they did something which I've been pushing for a while. The county also does it. They went out and they master leased rental units. So a lot of times you get a rental voucher or a housing voucher, and you win the lottery ticket when you get that, right? And then you can't find a place to live. You can't find a place you can afford. You can't find a landlord who will take it because they don't want to deal with all the government bureaucracy and the paperwork and all that crap. So what OPCC did, and the county does it with healthcare money, is they go out, they rent the unit. They're the master leaser, and they deal with all of the problems, they deal with the paperwork, and they make sure the landlord doesn't lose any money in the process. And that was a smart thing, and that is a way to help landlords and get people housed more quickly.
For the CES system, in regards to how it takes so long for everyone to get trained and onboarded, what are your thoughts on possibly making like the chair of homeless committees of neighborhood and community councils as liaisons, where they're your point person for that designated area to tell you exactly, okay, this is what we know, and kind of help that onboarding process kind of just move faster?
Yeah, so in Los Angeles County, we're broken up into 8 regions. We call them service planning areas or SPAs. And so in each SPA, we've tried to do exactly that, where we have, it's a service provider agency, but we designate them the lead agency for that region, because we know that each region looks a little bit different and has its own little ecosystem. It has its own set of resources available. So we designate a lead for, you know how I talked about there's a family system, a youth system, and a single adult system. So we designate a lead for each one of those systems, and they're really the ones who are responsible for pulling the whole community together. If you want to access CES, if you want access to how to navigate the system, they're the ones that we fund. LASA actually funds them to serve that function and pulling a regional response together for this area. So we're trying to do that, and we're still building it up, but we've seen it be very effective, because what works here in Pacific Palisades might not work in San Gabriel Valley and vice versa. So we're trying to localize those responses.
So how do we find out who that person is?
I can give you the list of all the lead agents. But it is St. Joseph's is the lead for adults.
Right, for this whole area, but
this region.
I work a lot in Westwood, and we
Yeah.
have a lot of issues over there.
I'll give you our website has a list of all the lead agencies and the POCs.
I'm just
yeah.
wondering if you're going to branch out from just St. John's to more, not just one for such a large area, but.
Well, so they're meant to be the sort of conveners to make sure everyone's talking, but they're not the only provider in the area. They're just the lead for CES to help people get connected if you want help navigating. But I can give you the list of who we have in each region.
Hi, my name is Bianca, and first of all, I want to thank you for all the hard work that you guys are doing, and for the homeless. And I moved to Malibu in 2013, and I was normally volunteering to do the count in persona. But when I decided to volunteer for Malibu, I found out that they didn't have a homeless count. So I partnered up with LASA, and I started the first homeless count in Malibu in 2014. The question that I have is that, because I've been following all this homeless crisis, and it's getting worse and out of hand, and people are going crazy because nobody wants the homeless in their community. But the question that I have is, how do you come up with the count? I feel like the count is very inaccurate, because especially with Malibu, you know that because of the geography of the place, we do a visual count. We don't walk around and count people. So if they see one car, there could be 4 people there, but they only count as 1. So I always struggle with the count for Malibu, and I don't know if you have the same problem in other communities.
I would say the challenges with the point-in-time count are not even local to just Los Angeles. I mean, the point-in-time count and sort of the methodology and the ideas behind it are a national model that we follow. It's part of one of our requirements actually to get funding from HUD is to actually do a point-in-time count with this methodology. But I hear what you're saying, it's not perfect. It is meant to just be a snapshot of what happens, and what we're trying to do is figure out exactly what you guys did with the task force, is who are the people in the community, know them by name, know what their needs are, and that's how you best address the issue. We just have a volume problem in Los Angeles where there are too many individuals and not enough resources. Just to scale it for you right now, when we talk about our CES, or our system that's housing all the information for everybody who's interacting with our system right now, we have 26,000 people who today are homeless, either sheltered or unsheltered, who have said, yes, I want housing, I want resources, and we don't have anything to offer them. So to us, it's not about people who are service resistant. It's not about people who don't want housing. Nobody wants to be homeless. But it's about how do we address the needs of those 26,000. The point-in-time count helps us to get there and to shape that picture, but you're right, it's not perfect, and it's something that we're always trying to perfect.
And also, another thing that bothers me is that there's a lot of money to solve the problem, but because of the red tape or whatever it is that we're not able to do something in the long term, so we have to look at temporary solutions, and I understand that. But, for example, LASA has received a lot of money, and I've seen, like, before when I used to meet and do the strategic planning for the count, we had like 2 or 3 people and very effective. But now, like, you guys send 2 or 3 more people, they're not needed, but they're getting paid for walking around pretending that they're doing something, you know? And
What's your question?
the question is, how are the monies being spent appropriately to train the people and where where you need the resources and to be used effectively?
So most of our point in time count is conducted by volunteers that we train and we try to engage and get them up to speed, but again, it's not perfect. If anything, the point in time count is an underrepresentation of the total number of individuals who are experiencing homelessness, and that's been true for the last few years. So in terms of where the money is going, the majority of LASA's money goes to service providers, so to the people concerned, to St. Joseph's and these providers who are doing direct services, whether it's outreach, interim housing, prevention services. We're really investing in prevention services and things like other housing subsidies like rapid rehousing that are less expensive than permanent supportive housing, and that we're seeing work for people who don't need that really intensive case management. So our funding goes directly to the people who do the work. We're just the ones who make sure that the services are being administered in the same way and fairly, and put the standards around what our sites should look like and provide.
And another question.
Wait.
Slide
No more questions from one person. Last question. Who has the last question? Sure.
Make them short. I'll do 2 short ones.
Hearing about the children and the vets and the victims of domestic abuse is heartbreaking. My question are the mentally ill that are on the streets. My office in Santa Monica has been there for a long time, and the change in the last 5-6 years has been palpable. It's got to the point where I won't let my kids go to the promenade at night. There are a lot more, I don't say a lot more, there are more clearly mentally ill homeless people in the Palisades. I know that Councilman Bonin said it's a county issue, but I think it'd be wrong to have this incredible conversation without acknowledging the mental illness and how to address it. Because selfishly, I'm terrified of that guy with his shirt off and no shoes on and yelling and screaming at my kids. And there has to be a way to address it. 'Cause I don't think, I could be wrong here, that it's just about putting them in housing or temporary housing. There's something much deeper than that. And that's what I think I'm terrified of. A lot of my friends that live around here are terrified. And my colleagues that I work with in Santa Monica are scared of.
Yeah, and I mean, if we're being very real and we're being very honest, those tend to be the people that you see. Those are the people that you notice. And so I think you're right, and also you're very wise to say that's who I see. It's not you don't see the children, right? You don't see the people who might be working or in safe parking who don't present as homeless. You see these people, and a lot of them do have very serious mental illness or addiction problems. So we have partnered with the county, and we now have outreach teams that go out that have medical professionals on them. So we have everything from psychiatrists, psychologists, primary care doctors who go out and do street outreach. We found that to be very useful in building relationships and helping people actually get the services that they need. That's outside of just housing. It's also, the mental health supports. Some of the other things we're doing for the substance abuse piece and some of the addiction challenges we see is our outreach workers are trained now to administer things like naloxone that actually reverses the impacts of overdoses. They've been doing that and administering that for a couple months now, and sadly have already reduced, or it's the good news that they've already reduced or reversed the impact of 4 overdoses on the street for people experiencing homelessness. So it's a combination of things that need to happen in addition to building up our availability of mental health resources that we have. There aren't enough of those in the county, but it's something that we need to keep working on. And you're right, those people do often require more supports and more help, and we just need to build our system around that to support them.
Thank you, Heidi.
I think we need to wrap it up. And run out of time. I have been asked in the past to summarize meetings. I don't know how I'm going to summarize all of this. Yeah, good luck. But I'll tell you a couple things. By the way, the question was asked about how we do things in the task force. Anybody wants to talk to me about some of the aspects of how we do it, I'd be happy to talk to them. But one of the takeaways for me is that what we've heard is that the homeless, the vast majority of the homeless are not from out of state. That's interesting because it doesn't seem like that to a lot of us. Another one is that LAHSA is not a safety net. And this idea that Heidi brings up, that we need to be solving problems upstream, that's something that a lot of us didn't really understand. And the third thing to me is this, the importance of alternative housing. The ideas that both Heidi and Mike bring up that are not just your basic building 50-unit apartment buildings or tents out in Modesto. So with that, thank you all for coming. Have a great rest of the evening. Heidi has brochures up here for anyone.